Okay, we're going to look at the structure of the Constitution real quick because we're going to spend some time in it for the rest of the semester. So we're going to look at the breakdown of it. Our Constitution has 7 articles, and they're just the main sections that this is broken down into with 7 different specific topics they're talking about. Then underneath each one of these articles, or most of them, it's broken down into 2 different sections. The main section underneath each article is called a section, and then each one of the sections, if they're broken down further, they're called clauses. And so when we actually start looking up individual issues in the Constitution, I will refer to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18. That's one we'll be spending some time with. Or Article 4, Section 4, which we've already talked about, which guarantees a Republican form of government. So each one of the articles is a main topic, and then the articles can be broken down into sections, and then the sections can be broken down into clauses. And as soon as I go through each one of the articles, I'm going to pull up a copy of the Constitution. I'm actually going to go through this with you. Article 1 is all about the legislative branch, and if you look down at the bottom, I have a picture here, obviously. There on the left-hand side is a picture of the Capitol. That's where our legislative branch works. Make sure you get in your notes this additional information. Our legislative branch is called Congress. They are responsible for making the laws. We have a bicameral legislature, which we covered earlier in terms of how the Founding Fathers made up our government. So we have a bicameral legislature, which means we have a 2-house legislature. So Congress is the name of our legislative branch. They're responsible for making laws. We have a bicameral legislature and made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Then we have the executive branch. Article 2 of the Constitution is all about the executive branch, and the executive is the president, the vice president, and then all the bureaucratic agencies, executive agencies. The executive branch is responsible for enforcing the laws. And then Article 3, you'll see that's the Supreme Court. The judicial branch is the court system that we have, and they are responsible for interpreting the laws. And you need to know that the only court that is established in the Constitution is the Supreme Court. Every other court that we have because Congress created it. That was one of the things that the Constitution gave Congress the power to create any lower courts under the judicial branch. So as we look at just these first 3 articles of the 7, we're looking at the Founding Fathers' ideas of separating the powers. They didn't want all of the powers to be in one group or one individual, so they split up the powers, this idea of separation of powers, giving the legislative branch the responsibility for making, executive in charge of enforcing, judicial branch in charge of interpreting the laws, being the referee if we have a problem. And then what they did is made a multiple step system so that the legislative branch, when they make the laws, the president has to sign it. But then the judicial branch has the power of judicial review, which we have already looked at, where they can say it doesn't matter that the legislative and executive all want this. If it violates the Constitution, it doesn't matter. We're going to nullify that and you can't do it. So we have this idea of separation of powers and the idea of checks and balances. Everything that happens in our government takes typically 2 to 3 of the branches to get anything accomplished. Article 4 deals with the relationship among the states. Articles 1, 2, and 3 dealt with the federal government, the government in Washington, D.C. that is responsible for making laws for everyone in the United States. But then all 50 states each have their own governments also. And so what Article 4 does is sets up how these states are going to relate to each other. And we'll look at some of the specifics when I pull up the Constitution itself. We've already talked about the amending process and the 4 ways to amend. That's all spelled out in Article 5 of the Constitution. Article 6 has the National Supremacy Clause. If you have a federal government and then you give all 50 states a government too, there are going to be times where the federal government and the state governments conflict. Right now, we're all very familiar with the legalization of marijuana in a couple of states, Colorado, Washington State, have legalized it despite the fact that the national government says that they can't. And so now we have this conflict. And I want you to get this ladder of supremacy in your notes. The highest law of the land, and it's called the ladder of supremacy. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. But the highest law in the land, the supreme law of the land, is the Constitution. So put that on top. Nothing can violate the Constitution. Then after that, you have federal laws and treaties. You have federal statutes and treaties, and those both fall on the same plane. So if you have a law and you have a treaty that conflict with each other, the one that is most recent is the one that is going to be the one that supersedes the other one. So make sure you have the Constitution as the supreme law of the land, followed by federal laws and treaties. Then after that, you have state laws. And so a state law cannot violate federal law, and it cannot violate the Constitution. And then the lowest rung of that ladder, obviously, is your local governments. Local laws and governments cannot violate state laws. State laws can't violate federal laws. Federal laws cannot violate the U.S. Constitution, and that's called the ladder of supremacy. And then finally, Article 7 is how we ratify, and it's only one sentence, and it says that when 9 of the 13 original states, or 9 of the 13 states ratify or formally approve this document, then it will go into effect. So what we're going to do real quick is take a look at a copy of the Constitution. We have the preamble up here, and we've already spent some time with that. And then you'll notice Article 1, this is the legislative branch, and then it's broken down into different sections. Article 1, Section 1 gives all legislative powers to Congress. That means they're the ones that can make the laws, and it will consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. And then Section 2, each one of these different paragraphs or breakdowns, these are clauses. So this would be Article 1, Section 2, this would be Clause 3. If you'll notice the things that are underlined, sometimes they'll be in a shaded. These are things that have been changed or are no longer in effect because we have a constitutional amendment. We remember the 3/5 compromise. That's where this is talking about. You know, when we start counting for purposes of figuring out how many representatives the state's going to get, at one point we counted all free persons and 3/5 of all other persons. We're talking about slaves here. And so anything you see underlined here, you know that's no longer in effect because we have an amendment to the Constitution that nullifies that. So Article 1, there's Section 3 and 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to spend some time in Article 1, Section 8. And there are actually 18 clauses, and these give a list specifically of what Congress can do, but we'll do that later. And so there are 10 sections under Article 1 all about the legislative branch. Here's Article 2, and once again we have a large section here that's no longer applicable just because of an amendment. So Article 2, you'll notice, is much shorter than Article 1. And we'll talk about that here in a few minutes. And then Article 3, dealing with the judicial branch, once again is even smaller or shorter than Article 2 of the Constitution. Here we have Article 4, broken down into 4 sections, and what this says is full faith and credit shall be given to each state to the public acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state, which means if you enter into a wedding or a marriage, a marriage in one state, it says all other states have to take those records and they have to give credit. This is where you're going to see the challenge of the same-sex marriage, because it says if you are married in one state, full faith and credit shall be given in each state to the public records, acts, records, and judicial proceedings of every other state. So regardless of how you feel on this issue, if you look at the Constitution, it's pretty much saying if you're going to grant that in one state, the other states. So this is probably when we see this challenged. This is the portion of the Constitution that you're going to see that. So citizens of each state shall be entitled to privileges and immunities of citizens in all of the states. This is dealing with extradition. If you flee from a state, this is how we're going to get you back. This part no longer pertains. We're talking about adding new territory or taking territory from one state to form another. It can't happen. And Article 4, Section 4, we've looked at that. This is where we have that guarantee of a republican form of government, and that if you attack one, you attack all. This is very important. When the terrorists attacked on 9/11, the attacks took place in New York and Washington, D.C., and the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. But it wasn't like, okay, we're going to let them take care of their own business. You attack one of us, you attack all of us. Then Article 5, this is the specific outline of how we amend the Constitution. Article 6, the Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance shall be the supreme law of the land. So this is where we get that. And the other really important thing from Article 6 of the Constitution, no religious test shall be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. So it doesn't matter what a person's religion is, and that wasn't always the case. You can run for office. And then Article 7 is really just this part right here. The ratification of the Convention of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states so ratifying the same. So here we have the 7 articles to the Constitution, once again broken down in sections, and each of the individual sections broken down into clauses. So you should be able to navigate through the Constitution when I ask you to go somewhere.